I want you to look with me to John 13 today, and I want us to begin by looking at an excerpt from the life of Jesus that is going to challenge our human tendency toward selfishness and entitlement. If left to ourselves, our default human nature is to become selfish, prideful, and entitled. And so what Jesus is doing in John 13 is challenging those tendencies in us. And the moment that is, it's a very famous moment in the life of Christ. This moment is establishing the culture of the early church. This is kind of a groundbreaking moment that established the culture of the early church. And this is where Jesus makes clear the kind of person that I have to be if I want to be a genuine follower of Jesus. This is kind of the attitude and culture my life should take. John 13, verse number 1, before the Passover celebration, Jesus knew that his hour had come to leave this world and return to his Father. He had loved his disciples during his ministry on earth, and now he loved them to the very end. It was time for supper, and the devil had already prompted Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything and that he had come from God and would return to God. So he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped the towel around his waist, and poured water into a basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Now in the next few verses, there is this personal interchange between Jesus and Peter, kind of a butting of head moment. And Jesus wins out, Peter surrenders, and then we pick up now in verse 12. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing when I washed your feet? Do you get it? Do you fully understand? You call me teacher and Lord. You are right, because that's what I am. And since I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you ought to wash each other's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you." In Jesus' day, there were clearly delineated class distinctions. But here in John 13, he turns those class distinctions and cultural expectations on their head when the most powerful, titled, authoritative man in the room grabs the servant's towel and starts washing feet. In the Roman Empire, there was a certain pecking order. You were born into it. And that social order was sorted out by race, gender, title, citizenship, whether or not you had citizenship in the Roman Empire or not, positions of authority you might hold. All of your life was determined by where you were in that social order. When you got to eat, what you ate, where you sat at the table was all connected to your social status. There was no arguing it, no fighting over it. You were born into it. You couldn't change it. It was an accepted fact. You didn't climb the ladder. You never ascended past the boundaries or limitations of your own social class. You learned early on who was above you in the social order and who was beneath you in the social order. So in moments like we read about in John 13, where there's a group of people gathered in the room in the empire, the Roman Empire, the lowliest person present, usually a house servant, would have been the one that would have washed the feet of the disciples. But when Jesus picked up the servant's towel and stoops to wash the feet of fishermen and carpenters, he wasn't just subverting social norms. He was challenging everybody in that room and all of us that would read about it later to look at our lives differently and to deeply examine the way we have ordered our personal lives. While the class distinctions in a modern democracy are not as pronounced as they were in the Roman Empire, they're still here, and we would be naive to think that they're not. It looks a little different in our world than it did in Rome, because in our culture, people can actually move from one social class to another. You can earn your way or study your way into another social class, or you can put off the appearances that you've moved classes by lying your way or borrowing your way into another social class. You see, our class system is driven by perception. It's an identity issue. It's an image consciousness that people have. And so we attempt to project a certain social class by our brands and our logos, by our clothing, our apparel, our shoes, the car we drive, where we live. It all plays into the social image we try to project. One of the fastest ways in our culture to physically or emotionally feel the difference in class is in air travel. I mean, those of you that travel for business, you probably had this experience where you randomly got upgraded, free upgrade on a flight, the luxuries of first class, and the minute you unexpectedly sit in that free first class upgrade, you feel this sense of superiority over the peasants that are now seated in the back. But then reality hits when you get to the next leg of the flight and you didn't get the free upgrade and you have to walk with envy through the first class cabin and join the peasants in the back of the plane. And the class distinction is clearly defined when the attendant slides the curtain in front. And how you feel when the curtain shuts all depends on which side of the curtain that you're sitting on. Over the last 15 years, Haley and I have developed this incredible relationship with a church in Singapore. I'm actually preaching there right now, believe it or not. I recorded the messages and sent them early. Sunday was yesterday there for them. I started figuring out my phone. I started getting all these Facebook requests from Singapore. I'm like, what's going on? I forgot. Oh, they're airing my message in Singapore this weekend. We've developed it's 15-year-long relationship with Trinity Christian Center there, and we've had several opportunities to travel, and they become friends. It's a powerful church. Our flight path usually takes us from Dallas to LA, LA to Hong Kong, Hong Kong to Singapore, and all said and done, we're in a plane for over 24 hours. That doesn't include the layover time we spend in the airports. And the longest leg is from LA to Hong Kong, which is about a 17-hour continuous flight. Now, prior to one of our trips to Singapore, Haley had been having some severe blood circulation issues in her lower legs, and because blood clots are a real concern on long flights, her doctors had asked that I would check into a business class seat, at least on the longest leg of the flight, because they fully recline, there's more room, and you can avoid blood clots and all that. So I did. And the tickets were $14,000 a piece. Just for that one leg from LA to Hong Kong. That would have been $28,000 for the two of us. And I'm looking at the computer and I looked over at Haley and I said, who does that? Who spends $28,000 for a 17-hour window? It was very obvious to us at that moment, we are not in that social class. So, before the trip, Haley started praying for a free upgrade on the leg from LA to Hong Kong. And before I could get to her and tell her how impossible that was, she had everybody in her little prayer group, everybody praying for an upgrade to Hong Kong. And I tried to let her down easy. I told her, baby, if we are upgraded, it will be from Dallas to LA. But that will be it. There is a 0 chance of being upgraded on a leg to Hong Kong. I mean, we fly often on American, so we're going to get upgraded, but this is not American Airline. This is an international airline. It's a different company, Cathay Pacific, and no airline is standing around giving away $28,000 worth of tickets. So when we got to the international terminal, we flew into the domestic terminal, had to get all our stuff, go to the international terminal in LA. We checked in for our flight to Hong Kong at the Cathay Pacific counter. The attendant asked for our passports, paused for a moment, looked at us, looked at our passports, and said, Mr. Jarrett, would you and Miss Jarrett mind upgrading to business class? We have oversold our coach seats and we need some volunteers to move to business class. I couldn't get my answer out of my mouth fast enough. And I was just waiting for Haley. I was waiting on the oh, ye a little faith, the sermon, I just waiting on all that, not believing in the power of prayer, all that stuff. But Haley was so tearfully grateful that God had cared about the little details of her life, that He had orchestrated this event for her, that she never even bothered me with the jeering of having little faith. It was the most incredible flight experience I have ever had. Part of it was because I knew how much they cost, and I felt like I just won a $28,000 lottery, okay? I think I ordered a serving of Haagen-Dazs ice cream every hour for 17 solid hours. And I leaned over to Haley. We had one of those little divides. I pulled the thing down. I leaned over and said, I think the stewardess knows we've never been here before. My football coach told me, Jarrett, if you ever make a touchdown, act like you've been there before, okay? Just act like you've been there before. Well, I forgot all that when I finally got to first class. I forgot I acted like I'd never been there before. Here's the problem. Haley and all her prayer partners were so focused on the leg getting to Hong Kong, they forgot to pray about the trip home. So we had to fly coach all the way home, and it was the longest, most miserable coach flight. It was tighter. The food tasted worse. It was cramped. It's the worst coach flight I ever had in my life. And the only reason is because I knew what was on the other side of that curtain. For the first time, I knew the difference. Class distinctions. The airline industry didn't invent them. Believe it or not, class distinctions were around during the stagecoach days of the Old West. There were actually 3 classes of tickets that you could buy on a stagecoach in the Old West. Most coaches had 6 to 9 passengers, some larger ones, a few more. But there was a first class ticket, a second class ticket we would call coach, but the forgotten ticket was the third class ticket. But class distinctions on the old stagecoaches wasn't about the roominess of the seat or the type of food you ate on the journey. It was about what was expected of the traveler while they were on the journey. For example, a first class ticket allowed you to stay in the stagecoach no matter what happened, no matter what conditions you encountered. If you had a first class ticket, you knew from the start there would be no effort required of you. You had paid to exempt yourself from the inconveniences of travel. Holders of second class tickets had to exit the coach in an inconvenience, stand outside, or if necessary, walk alongside the coach if difficulties arose until the inconvenience passed. They didn't have to do anything. They just had to get out and stand there until the inconvenience was over. But the third class ticket holders were the ones that were forced to get out and push. And if the coach was stranded on an incline, it was the third class ticket holders that got out and pushed, or if it got in the mud because it had been rainy and they got stuck or something happened to a wheel, it was the third class ticket holders that had to get in the dirt, dig it out of the mud, change the wheel, whatever. They knew going in they would be forced to invest sweat equity in the inconveniences along the way while everybody else who had higher class tickets looked on in relative comfort. Here's what Jesus was saying in John 13. In that famous passage where Jesus washed the disciples' feet, Jesus was calling every person that follows him to intentionally choose a third-class ticket. If you're a true Jesus follower, the day you gave your life to Jesus, you signed up to get out and push, to get in the dirt, to get in the mud, to move his agenda forward in the world by serving people, loving people, and inconveniencing yourself for the sake of others. The servant-hearted actions of Jesus in John 13 are a direct confrontation to the human tendency that defaults to selfishness, entitlement, and pride. I mean, think about it for a minute. Why do we want first class anything? Most of the time, it's because we want to be pampered. We want somebody else serving us. We like feeling like a VIP. And sadly, what's supposed to be a momentary experience on a flight or a special week of vacation, we end up carrying those attitudes into the way we live our lives, and we start feeling entitled as if we deserve it or somebody owes us something. But Jesus' hierarchy of relationship values was radically different than those of his world and those of ours. And I'm concerned, as you study the lives of contemporary Christ followers, I'm concerned that our relationship values, our hierarchy system, more aligns with the world and the culture than it does what Jesus exhibits for us in John 13. Here he is, fully God. Yet according to Philippians 2, Paul says he laid aside his divine privileges and took the form of a servant. That is the attitude with which he became human. He comes on the human scene in the womb of a teenage peasant girl and made an animal's food trough his first bed. That is not exactly what you would think when you think of royalty and divinity making the grand entrance on the human scene. He was the son of a carpenter of a despised rural village called Nazareth. They said, "What good can come from Nazareth?" Here's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords taking the form of a servant in front of everybody else he encounters. This is the way he came into the world. It's the way he lived his life, and he went out as a suffering servant. And on this last night of his life, the night before his crucifixion, he's trying to make one last attempt to root out the world's hierarchy system from the hearts of his disciples. They are reflecting more of the Roman culture and the Roman Empire than they are the subversive forms of leadership that Jesus has taught. So in an illustrated sermon, trying to root Rome out of the heart of his disciples, he grabs a towel and starts to wash their feet. And he states while doing so that he is purposefully doing it because of his authority, because of who he is. You see, they thought that he was exempt from that because of his authority. He was exempt from that because of his title, because of who he was. And Jesus says, no, the fact that I do have authority and the fact that I do have a title and I am who I am demands that I take the servant's towel and wash your feet. Here's how he said it. Jesus knew that the Father had given him authority over everything. So he got up from the table. Notice the cause and effect between verse 3 and verse 4. Because he had been given all authority, he got up, grabbed the servant's towel, and washed their feet. He knew the Father had given him authority over everything, so he got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped the towel around his waist, poured water into a basin, and washed their feet. Not in spite of who he was, but because of who he was. His power, position, and titles did not exempt him from serving, but were the motivation and cause for his serving. Here's a paraphrase of verse 3 and 4. Jesus, knowing he came from God and was going to God, got up from the table, laid aside his garment, wrapped himself in a towel, and proceeded to deal with the dirt. He got out and pushed. He inconvenienced himself. He got dirty. He served. Jesus chose, modeled, and lived the life of a third-class ticket. Our world thinks the higher you climb, the more titles you get, the more wealth and power that you amass, the more exempt you are from inconveniencing yourself with serving. Your position and power in our world should entitle you to let everybody else do the grunt work. But Jesus' life turned that value system on its head. He teaches us that leadership and influence in the kingdom of God is not about titles. It's about the servant's towel. Leadership is not about titles. It's about towels. It's been a common experience over the years. Pastored going on 30 years. And it's been a experience. We'll have church-wide events, something will be going on, and inevitably I'm kind of just floating, and if I see something, I just jump in and fill the hole, and it's not uncommon that I'll see a spill or a mess, so I'll grab a broom or a mop, and over those years I have learned it's inevitable. Long enough, if the broom or the mop is in my hand, some kind-hearted soul will come over to me and say, "Pastor, you shouldn't be doing that." And in a frustrated reply, I will say, "Why?" And the only answer I really ever get is, "I don't know, because you're the pastor." Now, I understand what they're trying to do, and it's genuine and sincere. They're trying to honor the position of pastor, and I genuinely appreciate it. But what it shows more than anything is a worldly understanding of leadership. Because when you go there, you're thinking more like the culture than you are like Jesus. Being a pastor does not exempt me from mops and brooms. What it should mean is that I'm the first to grab one when there is a need. So if you ever see me with a mop or broom in my hand, don't come try to take mine. Just go find another one and help me clean up the mess. Real leadership is not about privilege and exemption from the dirty work. A real leader is a servant leader. And this is the way Jesus puts it in verse 12. After washing their feet, he put on his robe again and sat down and asked, "Do you understand what I was doing? Do you get it? Do you really? Do you understand? You call me teacher and Lord. You're right, that's who I am. But you think because I'm teacher and Lord, I shouldn't be doing that. But because I am teacher and Lord, I washed your feet. Now you should do the same to others. Go serve other people. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you." That's real leadership. Real leaders serve. The real difference makers in the kingdom of God are servant-hearted. It is the secret to true greatness, because this is an upside-down kingdom. God's kingdom is a kingdom of the reverse. This is a kingdom where widows are more powerful than kings, and her two mites has more influence with God than the wealth of entire nations. In this kingdom, the way up is down. In this kingdom, the last are first and the first are last. And in this kingdom, you gain your life by losing it and giving it away. In this kingdom, the king becomes a servant and is a holder of a third-class ticket. He chose it. And if you're a true follower of Jesus, you'll do the same. If you go back and read all the Gospels chronologically, okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, all the events are not chronological like we're used to reading chapters in a book, but you can read them. There are the Bibles that make them chronological, so you read them in historical order. And when you do that, you'll realize right before this foot washing moment, this meal, you start understanding why this was so important to Jesus. Because just earlier, a few hours earlier that same day, these disciples had been fighting over who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They were jockeying for position and arguing among themselves. When Jesus sets up his earthly kingdom, which one of us is going to have the greatest seat of influence and the greatest power? And they're fighting among themselves, and Jesus knows this, and he has to be somewhat disappointed. Here he is, his time on earth in the flesh with them is almost over. All the discipleship, all the leadership development looks as if it hasn't been effective, because these men are still jockeying based on Rome's hierarchy system. The kingdom has not got in them enough. And this moment in John 13 was trying to get Rome out of their hearts so they could see his heart. This little band of brothers had been invaded by a spirit of competition. And this little band of brothers who Jesus had chosen to change the world were jeopardizing the entire plan if they didn't learn this thing called servant leadership. So he modeled it for them. He showed them a servant heart. He got out and pushed. He got in the dirt. He washed their feet. And he was saying, fellas, if you want the Father to use you like he promised, you're going to have to trade in your first-class tickets with the privileges and exemptions they come with, and you're going to have to pick up a third-class ticket, because it's only third-class ticket holders that change the world in this kingdom. According to Jesus, true status in the eyes of God is not one of exemption or privilege where you pay the most so you will have to do the least, but the eager willingness to inconvenience yourself to serve the needs of others. So with that being the case, if the greatest among us is the servant of all, if that's the case, then it means this: the greatness of a church is not determined by its seating capacity, but by its serving capacity. The greatness of a church is determined by how many of its people are holders of third-class tickets. A church is limited in its impact when too many of its people feel entitled to receive without a burden to serve, pay it forward, or invest in others. It's what we call the sit, soak, and sour epidemic. So go ahead and sniff your neighbor. See if there's something sour around you, okay? When there are not enough third-class tickets in a church, there is a sour smell of selfishness and entitlement. We were not saved to sit, soak, and sour. We were saved to serve. The day you made Jesus Christ the Lord of your life and your name was written in the Lamb's Book of Life is the day your Heavenly Father issued you a third-class ticket. I referenced the idea of third-class tickets several years back. If you've been a part of North Place only one other time in 16 years of pastoring, have I talked about it? And it was several years ago. We were about 2015. We've not been in this building long at all. And we were needing to launch new services, and we needed hundreds of new people serving in various places to make that happen. Well, we're in a similar situation right now, but for different reasons. We're starting to ease our way out of a pandemic, and spring break gets over and people get vaccinated. And I saw people last week that hadn't been to church in a year because they completed their vaccination doses. And a lot of things are happening, and people are feeling more comfortable, and they're re-engaging, some of them, church for the first time. And as we approach Easter, attendance is going to pick up. But there are some things that are very concerning when you study church as a whole in this country, and North Place is reflective of some of those negative trends. There's proving to be some long-term negative patterns, first, in the way people attend church. Some people are just out of the habit altogether, and they've replaced Sunday mornings with something else. Others are opting to stay in the comfort of their home. At one time, it was necessary, and for some it still is, but for most it's not. But they've just opted for the convenience of their home. Still others are saying that they're just going to catch church on the replay on Tuesday while they're on the treadmill. And while technology is incredibly convenient, and I thank God for the gift of technology to help us navigate this pandemic, it will never replace the need for human touch, and it will never replace the physical experience of being in the presence of God with God's people in God's house on God's day. There is no replacement for that. Here's a second pattern that people have noticed, people smarter than me that have studied this, and we see it. As people do start returning to church, they are more hesitant than ever, less willing than ever to serve. And they list a multitude of reasons, with very few of those reasons being really legitimate. Our staff and a few core volunteers have done an incredible job over the last year holding things together in the absence of an army of volunteers. I mean, it was this Sunday 1 year ago was the first Sunday we could not meet physically. And this group of staff members and core volunteers have run cameras, they've worked parking, been ushers, greeters, and hospitality staff, served in the nursery, worked kids ministry. But you need to listen to me. If the saints don't start trading in some first-class tickets for some third-class tickets, our current ratios are not sustainable, especially headed into Easter. Coming out of this year of crisis and all that it's brought our way, there will be families that have never darkened the door of a church that are going to be looking for a church that will offer them hope this Easter. And my prayer is that a lot of them come looking to North Place. But we're going to limit our impact and the potential of the harvest if too many of us are sitting, soaking, and souring. We must be about the Father's business. So I have a challenge for you. We're going to treat Easter like it was a little mini Billy Graham crusade. And we're gearing up for life change. We have teams of people. We're adding services and planning engaging experiences for children and entire families. We have a prayer team intercessions going on for all the event. We're stuffing new believers packets and getting ready with expectancy that lives are going to be changed. So much more is going on. But none of it is going to be effective if we don't have an army of servant leaders to make it happen the way it's supposed to. So, next Saturday, March 20th, we're having a Dream Team rally. That's what we call our servant leaders here, the Dream Team. And we're going to prepare servant leaders for Easter. And we really need you. There will be a general rally in the beginning, and then we'll break out into some specific sessions that will help us get ready for the serving opportunities we're gifted to serve in We're going to serve you breakfast, and we'll provide childcare for you for children up to the age of 2. And I want you to know, this is not a long-term commitment. I'm just asking you to help us through Easter. Make this church the friendliest, most gracious, servant-hearted church to people and families that are longing for hope this Easter. Which means we need a fully staffed parking team, a fully staffed nursery and children's team, a fully staffed hospitality team, and so much more. And to be honest, none of those have been fully staffed for a year this Sunday. None of them. A lot has been done on the backs of a few. Here's my hope. It's just an Easter commitment. That's all we're asking. Help us serve in great capacity this Easter. But here's what I hope. I hope you get so addicted to being a part of changed lives that you decide to make serving a lifestyle rather than a one-time event. That's what I hope. We need some folks to get out and push. I wish I could give you, everybody that walked out today, a water basin and a servant's towel. So every one of us would have this physical image of what Jesus was trying to tell all of us in John 13, but that's not very practical. But what I am going to give every one of you when you walk out today is a third-class ticket. And on that third-class ticket is the time, date, where to text, how to register, so we're prepared for you. So it may have been on your screen a moment ago. It will be on the card. Please register. Help us Saturday. Help us get ready to change lives. Let God use us on Easter weekend. Here's what Jesus said, Matthew 20:28. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others. Now, I'm going to leave you with two things, okay? A story and some really random dad jokes, but they have a point, okay? My kids hate it when I tell dad jokes, and as a dad, my goal is to get on their nerves, so I try to make them as corny as I possibly can, okay? So here goes. What do you call a boomerang that doesn't work? A stick. What do you call 4 bullfighters in quicksand? Cuatro cinco. What do you call cheese that isn't yours? Nacho cheese. What do you call a Christian who isn't serving? A contradiction. You were saved to serve. No clear reading of the New Testament or study of the life of Jesus could lead you to any other conclusion. Now for the story. On some of those trips to Singapore, well, every trip Haley and I have gone to Singapore, our assignment is to speak to pastors. Singapore is a safe gathering place for pastors around the world who serve in the hardest places. Most of the pastors that gather from Singapore, it's an unsuspicious place for them to come, easy to access. And so most of the pastors in that conference that we're serving there are pastors that are persecuted for their faith. They have either been imprisoned, beaten, or had family members martyred for their faith. And so it is not uncommon in a room full of thousands of church leaders from around the globe. I mean, the building is more like an arena, and the people in the back it is packed. Thousands of pastors, and when it's not uncommon that among those thousands of church leaders there will be underground church leaders from China, Vietnam, leaders from Cambodia, Japan, Thailand, many from Muslim majority countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Dubai, Saudi Arabia. I mean, when you stand up and look, it's literally like seeing a slice of heaven on earth. They're from Europe, all over Europe, England, Germany, Russia, India. It's just incredible, humbling. On one of my trips there, I was sharing there's always 2 speakers, and I was sharing speaking responsibilities this year with Lee Grady, who at that time, Lee was the editor of Charisma magazine. And because of his role as the editor of Charisma magazine, he had been very up close and personal and behind the scenes with a lot of America's name brand, celebrity leaders, pastors, media personalities. And in some private conversations, Lee was unburdening his soul to me. He said, Brian, I'm really concerned. I edit a magazine who tells the story of all these people. But he said, I know some of them really well. And he just said, I'm bothered, I'm worried, because as I look at the people we're ministering to this week, because of mass media. You got leaders who started out pure and they're making a difference in the kingdom somewhere in another part of the world, and they see this guy on TV from America and they think that's what success is. And so instead of now following the servant-hearted model of Jesus, they become pompous like American media personalities and celebrity preachers. And he said, it's going to ruin the growth of the global church if we don't change this. We got to do something about this. And Lee came to the pulpit that afternoon after lunch with that burden in his heart. He opened the Bible to John 13 and started preaching on the heart of Jesus and begging that room of pastors, please, please, don't adopt the attitudes and the mindset of America's media pastors and celebrity personalities. Go to the book, follow Jesus. Right before he got up to start preaching, he walked over to me and turned his mic off and he said, do you trust me? And I said, yes. He said, I don't know if I'm going to do it, but at the end, if the Spirit leads, I'm going to do something. And if I do, just follow my lead. I said, okay. As he got to the end of his message, he said this, it's come to my attention that there is a pastor here from India who is a Dalit. A Dalit or a Dalit in India is an untouchable. They are the lowest of the low. They don't even fit the caste system. They don't even make the low level of the caste system. If you've ever seen or heard of the movie Slumdog Millionaire, it was about the 170 million people living in the slums of India who were a part of the untouchables, the Dalits. There was a pastor, brother, who was there who was a Dalit and pastoring among the slums of India. Lee then said, it has come to my attention that this brother has been incredibly lonely while he's been here, being excluded even by his own countrymen. And Lee said, brother, I don't want to embarrass you, but would you join me up front? In the very back, this dirty little Indian man, small guy, he got up and starts walking in his tattered clothes to the front of the building. And as he made his way down, Lee moved a curtain behind the podium. I hadn't seen anything there. He grabbed a water basin with water already in it and a towel. And he called the brother up on the platform. And he looked over at me and said, will you help me? And here are the only two Americans in the room that have been poor models to these people who've done more for the kingdom than any of us ever will. He rolled up his sleeves, and that man stuck his dirty feet, obviously never had medical care or attention, in that water. And Lee washed one foot, and I had the incredible honor of washing the other one. It wrecked me. It wrecked Lee. It wrecked. Little Indian pastor just wept. It wrecked thousands of leaders, no matter where they were in the world. None of us that were in that room will ever be the same again. Ever. It wasn't my idea. I just thank God I was assigned in His sovereignty to be there that day, because I made a commitment kneeling at the feet of a slum pastor in India. God, don't ever let me adopt American hierarchy. Help me keep the heart of Jesus for as long as I live. I'm telling you, North Place, trade in your first class tickets. If the world's going to be changed, it's going to be because there was an army mobilized that wasn't afraid to get out and push, to get dirty, to wash feet, to inconvenience ourselves for the sake of other people. We sang this a moment ago, but it was a worship song. Now, will you turn it into a prayer? Stand with me and sing this. Come on, make it a very personal prayer today. God, will you make this a sacred moment of surrender, and will you help your people connect the dots? that when they show grace and love in a parking lot or a smiling face, or love a baby checked into the nursery to a family that's never been to church, and they got all the excuses and they're nervous and worried, and yet the interaction in the parking lot and the kindness in the lobby and the way their kids are loved all of a sudden opens their heart when the word is preached. It doesn't matter what the word is preached. If those experiences aren't good, the seed isn't planted. And so what they do is as important as anything I could do. So Lord, can we mobilize an army that becomes addicted to life change? Will you bless them and keep them and make your face shine down upon them? Be gracious to them. Turn your countenance their direction, Lord. Give them peace and empower them to serve with a third-class ticket. In Jesus' name, amen and amen. We'll keep this environment worshipful for you if you want to linger. God bless you.